Keiko O'Brien wants to visit her mom in Kumamoto. Joseph Sisko's aubergine stew is famous, and Jake Sisko sleeps with a baseball and glove. Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Seventh Rule with Sirach Lofton.
Hello.
My name is Ryan T. Husk. We have something special for you. We are doing a Deep Space Nine deep dives starting right now with episode 1, Emissary, story by Rick Berman and Michael Piller, teleplay by Michael Piller, directed by David Carson. This was January 3rd, 1993. Of course, everybody knows this is a Nog episode. So Melissa Longo is here, classing up the joint.
Hi.
Yay.
1990, January 3rd, 1993. That was a happy birthday to me.
Yes.
Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday. You were
birthday.
0.
I was 0. No.
Maybe 1 or 2.
Tee.
So, people you might be asking, well, what's this about? You just reviewed the entirety of Deep Space Nine. And yes, now that we've reviewed every single episode, we're going to go back, kind of do a deep dive every month on one of them in order, because, you notice things the second time. Once you've seen it, you kind of have a different perspective. You see different things, you notice new things, you have different ideas or conclusions, and you have different favorites, and things change. So we're going to be looking through all that. And in the next segment, we've got Mr. Armin Shimerman joining us. That's Quark on Deep Space Nine, of course. So everybody stay tuned for that, because that's when the show gets really good. So let's get into these deep dives, shall we?
Let's do it.
That's like the what are those pools? There's like the shallow pool and the deep.
Yeah, I don't know. We're not going to go there.
I don't know. I don't even know. I guess it's called the deep section. What is that?
I'm not going to jump in your pool right now, right?
The deep end. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm not going to jump.
Well, that depends.
Jay, get us started with the bang. Thank you.
Wow.
What a deal.
No, right away from the beginning, I noticed that JG was in this opening scene, right? That's JG as the Romulan captain? And I said,
unmistakable
I didn't
voice.
Notice that. Yeah, look at JG. I didn't recognize that he was in the pilot. Like he was there from the beginning, and that was pretty cool. Kind of right away. That was the first. I didn't remember that kind of moment,
I'll tell you what kind of stuck out to me. One of the things, and I was hoping to ask you, Sirach, I know you were a young tyke, as evidenced by the fact that we see you as a young tyke in this episode, but hopefully you might remember this. And if not, then of course Armin can help us out in the next segment. But I did wonder, I mean, first of all, a 90-minute episode, but you would assume it's going to be 2 weeks, but it felt like it had to be even more than 2 weeks to shoot it, like 3, maybe 4, because there were so many different sets, so many different locations. It was so big budget. They actually spent the money to make Odo turn into a duffel bag and back and all that kind of stuff. But first of all the locations, Sirach, do you remember where the fishing place was? The fishing lake. That was probably your very first day shooting, right?
It was probably the first day shooting, if I'm not mistaken. I was thinking about that too, and I wanted to say 2 spots come to my head. One, I keep hearing the Disney Ranch. So I don't know if that's at the Disney Ranch, which I can't recall what it looks like to this day, so I can't really compare it and no.
I mean, there's one way up in north of San Francisco, but there may have been one down here as well.
Yeah, no, this was definitely in California. I mean, in Los Angeles shoot. The other thing that kind of looked familiar to me was Griffith Park, and I felt like I could see the Griffith Park kind of mountains in the background. So I'm not sure which one it was. When Armin comes for the next segment, we can ask him if he remembers.
Well,
But yeah, that was the first and only time I've ever been fishing
so far. But the other thing I wanted to ask
Yeah.
you about that particular, cluster of scenes that were there is they clearly shot the moments with you and your dad on the holodeck, right? And
Yeah.
then later on in the episode, we see you being a prophet, right? So in my mind, I'm imagining that they shoot all the scenes in the holodeck, then they do lunch or you do a break, you change over, you do whatever. And then the second half of the day, or at least the second half of the shoot, the director is coaching you up saying, okay, now totally different way of delivering lines. You're going to be a prophet now. You're going to be asking questions in, this non-corporeal kind of way. But clearly this has got to be all in the same day and they have the same outfits and the same setups. Do you remember any of that? I mean, do you remember if one was before the other or any kind of coaching that came with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't remember what the direction was about when it comes to being one of these prophet angel type, that character. And I don't even know if my comprehension would have been able to understand what I don't know how they explained that to me. They would be explaining it to me the way Cisco's trying to explain it to
Time.
to them in this episode. Exactly. Like I would be looking like, okay. And they're like, well, you're this wormhole prophet. Okay.
Yeah,
And, and he only exists in this space and you don't know what time is. And I mean, that would be a real accomplishment if I was able to comprehend that at that time, which I'm not going to take credit for. I'm not going to say I didn't either, because it depends on what the direction was. If the direction excluded that kind of, conceptualization, let's think about what this is about, and was more like a simplified version of, hey, it's not you, but it's a version of you that doesn't know this person as your father. And that would be probably the simplest way to kind of get me to give in dial up the performance that you need for that.
You know what stood out to me about your performance as a prophet was, one, you were my favorite prophet.
Yes. Not the rando baseball player that we hadn't seen before.
No, I mean, he was great too. I did like all of the prophets. But what I noticed about Jake Sisko, the prophet, was that you listened in a different way than the others listened.
He leaned in a bit.
And it was the way a child listens and absorbs information that they're getting, and I think sometimes children have the ability to listen better than adults do, and that's what I noticed about this on this rewatch. I was like, oh, he's so good and he's so cute. Look at little Sirach. He's so cute.
Thank you, Melissa. Yeah, it's crazy because now watching it this many years since we started the first watch, my daughter is closer in age to where I was when we started. So I'm sure I'm about 13 in those shots, and she's 11 now. So it's really close. Like she's she's there almost in facial features and body, like facial expressions. Like, so there were certain expressions that I was making specifically when I was upset about the living arrangements, sleeping on the floor on that thin mat.
Can I say you delivered the best line, as in not the best line, but the best delivery of a line in that episode? And I don't know if I had noticed it before. It was when you right then when O'Brien says, oh, we can get you, whatever, you got a flat
field
mat,
rations.
whatever, field rations, right? And then you look at your dad and you go, Dad,
Right.
That's it. You know, a normal 13-year-old actor would just be like,
Love.
Dad, or, you know, something, but you really, man, you got that line. You understood
Mhm.
it. And it made me laugh. Just that one word, the way you said it.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I was kind of, I liked a few of the lines myself. And there were a few moments that I played where, you know, I felt like Cisco was trying to make me laugh. And, you know, like,
Mhm.
you know, don't worry, we'll get over it. You know, things will be fine.
Like when he said,
And I was,
okay.
I
yeah,
love that.
yeah,
I love
when he
that.
did that. And I didn't laugh in response, right? It was like mocking me,
Right.
irritated me more, right?
Yeah.
Like how my daughter is. Like if I try to mock something she does, she'll give me the same exact face that I used in that moment. So, so I was like,
Great.
that's where that face comes from. That's my face.
I've seen that face before.
I've
Wow.
seen that face, and I'm
Wait till
not
she finds
playing
out
with
about
this.
wormhole aliens.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. We'll see if she's a better prophet than I am, or that I was. But yeah, no, there was a few moments there. I did also like the way I kind of delivered the food replicator line to, and I was like, "Is this
Yeah.
the food replicator?" Like,
Right.
And O'Brien's like, it's kind of looks bad on him because he's, you know, he's checking us in, and this thing's on the fritz, so he's like, "Oh yeah, we'll fix that. It's not working right now." But so I thought that felt natural. I thought I did enjoy those moments there. I did like the okay line where Cisco makes fun of okay. um, and the other thing I thought was great too was, I know we'll get into this more, but uh, just like read this like Nog from the beginning. Like this is
Oh,
the pilot episode from the beginning.
Yes.
Like starts. This is how you're basically introduced to his character, and he's a criminal, right? He's a criminal, and kind of unapologetic about it. You know, he's committed to it. It's not like he was being dragged along into this thing. It looks like he's the mastermind.
Mhm. Yeah,
yeah.
Melissa, you know where I especially noticed how good of an actor Aaron was in the first shoot, the first day, possibly, was when he looked scared, when he was caught
Mm.
and they were saying, like, you know, he's going to be taken to the brig or something like that. And he didn't even have a line, he just had a look. And he was just like conveying, I mean, it was perfectly conveyed.
Mhm.
And I was like, wow, that's, you know, that's really good, especially through all that makeup and, you
Yeah.
know, on a new set. It's pretty amazing.
Well, yeah, I noticed his physicality, the physicality that he put into the way he moved, and
The
not just hunched
slinking.
over, but it was like he was on guard and ready to go, kind of like a cat stalking its prey, and you know, ready to go. And then, well, and the hissing kind of goes along with
Yeah,
that too.
yeah,
But yeah, no, I noticed that he's so natural in his delivery of nonverbal communication, which is it was wonderful to see. And it's always surprising. I don't know why, but he was so good. He was really talented.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Since day one
yeah.
there.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Other things jumped at me as well, though. Like now that I watched the whole show, and I noticed how well Michael Piller and Rick Berman set up the story for what was to come for for the
Mm,
following
yes.
seasons. Basically,
Mm-hmm.
they really laid a solid foundation of
Totally.
what the storyline was going to be about. There's really not much deviation from where they start here to the final episode. It's exactly like check for check exactly where they said it's going to go.
Yeah, I
You're
agree.
the
It was like,
prophet. Yeah.
it was like from the first feeling I got when watching this was that it was a show about family. And that was the last feeling I got on the last episode, that it was a show about family. And it was just this very clear, and like you said, this episode ends and we know exactly the direction that the show is taking. You know, we understand the characters. Everybody had a very good and easy to digest introduction. The characters were well defined. The story, that the conflicts that are to come were all very clearly defined. I thought it was just a fantastic pilot, and I always have.
Well, and one of the things that first jumped out at me was the camera work in the very beginning during the Battle of Wolf 359, and how shaky and chaotic everything was. And I thought that was a bold choice to open the episode, how to open the episode, because it kind of felt like this was the starting off point. This is where ground zero, where we begin. And it just gives us someplace else to go. Up to this point, Star Trek has felt very static in its camera work, but this was a lot different, that set the tone and the atmosphere of where this story begins. And I thought that was really wonderful.
Shout out to Marvin Rush for a lot of great shots.
But also, you know, other things I thought that were foreshadowed in very subtle ways. When Odo decides that he wants to come along on the trip because he gives the speech about his people and he doesn't know who his identity is, right? He said, my people could be over there. And he says it with this kind of like, this is the line, I'm drawing this line, you can't talk me out of it. I'm, you know, this is what I'm committed to. And Kira gives him a look where I felt like she's almost, it's a foreshadow look. It felt like it because now I know where it goes on, but it felt like she's looking at him like, I like that about you. Whatever you just did, there was something about it that she's like registering, like, I like this man because he's not afraid to speak his mind. He's not afraid to assert himself. You know, there were certain things that quality wise, and I felt like it was a subtle, just a real quick glance. I don't even know if it was written in there, but the camera definitely ended on the close up on her. And she just registered that like, okay, I can
respect
work with
that.
This guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I can respect that.
Well, speaking of respect, we're going to have to take a break right now so that we can get a very respectable human in here. And our second segment is going to have Armin Shimerman, everybody. So stick around. Don't touch that dial. Is that what people said? Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Seventh Rule. Mr. Armin Shimerman has joined us for this deep dive. And before we hit record, Armin had some really cool questions, and we want to talk about them. Thanks for joining us, Armin. Take it away, please.
Thank you. And forgive me, my dogs are seeing something outside the window, so they want to join in as well. But the question I wanted to ask both Melissa and Sirach is a question that, as an actor, I'm fascinated by, which is what material did Melissa, what material did Aaron have to do in order to audition for the role of Nog?
Yeah, so he was initially given because the first question he got asked was, do you know what a Ferengi is? And he said no. So David Livingston gave him a copy of The Last Outpost.
David Livingston was one of the producers and one of our directors, yes.
Right.
Go ahead.
And along with the copy of the script. So he got a lot of his mannerisms in the first episode from watching The Last Outpost. And I believe the first scene, the scene that he auditioned with, and the first scene that he was involved in shooting was actually in a future episode, A Man Alone, where he meets Jake for the first time. And 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 so he read the script, and in his audition, he was asked, "So, how do you feel about having a worm in your belly?" And Aaron goes, "No, I don't have a worm in my belly. That's a drill. I'm playing a Ferengi." And I believe it was David Livingston. He's like, that helped nail the job for you. And not only the mannerisms, but he did his own work, and it was obvious that he had prepared for his audition. So those two things, I think, helped land him the job. So do your homework.
Great advice.
It's interesting to me that they were interested in seeing the relationship between Nog and Jake. That was really important to them, as it always was during the course of the show. So I turn the spotlight on you now, Sirach. What did you have to audition with in order to get the role, and how many times did you audition?
I think I auditioned 3 different times. I think it was 3 times, and I do remember auditioning the scene that we do on the bridge, the fishing scene, the fishing scene. Which is why on the first day of shoot, I felt super comfortable because I had already known, once you know all the material and you audition that material, and that's what you have to film first, you really feel comfortable. You're like, oh yeah, no, I know where I'm at. I know what's going on. I mean, a little direction here and there, the wardrobe adjustments or whatever, but ultimately, as far as knowledge of the scene, you went over it 100 times already, during the
But this
audition
was
process.
the first time you were working with Avery, right?
Yes. I auditioned in the final audition with Avery. He was in the final audition. Yeah, so I did get a chance to read with him in that final audition. And later on, he told me something that I don't remember, but he said that as soon as I walked into the audition, I ran up, I said, "Hey," I said, "Dad." And I ran up to him, gave him a big hug. And he was like, he said, "Who is this kid?" Like, I just run up to this guy and give him a hug.
That's your future castmate.
That was
right then and there.
My dad. That was my dad. So, of course, I knew which one was going to be my dad when I walked in the room. It was pretty obvious,
What if you ran up and hugged David Livingston?
Yeah. It wouldn't have worked as well. But so no. And then he says,
"I don't think David Livingston would have allowed you to hug him." So
yeah. No, but the thing was, he said, as he was hugging me, he said, "This guy's got cologne on," because I used to wear a lot of cologne at a young age. So here I am, 13, walking in there with a collared shirt and cologne, and he's like, "Who the hell is this guy?"
So cute.
And so that's the audition. Now you're doing the fishing scene. How did Avery start that relationship that was so super, not only on screen but off screen? How did that start?
It started by him making me feel like it was the two of us against whatever, it was us versus the camera. It was us versus the story or the script. It was us versus the moment in the situation, but it was us though. So when they cut, he doesn't do what some actors do and just kind of go into their own bubble and walk away and looking for their own adjustments and make up a wardrobe. He was staying there with me in those moments while they're lighting or whatnot, and talking with me and making me feel super comfortable, like he's there for me, like it's us. And I remember that feeling from right away. I was like, oh, so it's us. So that made me feel like if I had anything, questions or felt any kind of way, I'm going to go to him with it versus anybody else. Right.
It's telling
away,
that
it was like,
it's telling that Armin, as a theater teacher, is nodding vehemently when you're saying this. He's like, "This is exactly right. This is it."
Well, it was the beginning of one of the high points. One of the most important things about our show was the relationship between Sisko and Jake. And we all were aware of it. We were all astounded by it because it was such a loving thing. It was just we all were aware of that really early on, and I wanted to know how that started because, as you said, you were strangers when you ran in and gave him a hug, said Dad. And I would assume, I'm going to make the assumption that Avery was not yet cast, well, when he was in the room with you, that he had not been cast at that moment. Um, um, but but already he was uh, in the process of forming a relationship with the young man that is you.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what the situation was on the other end. I just know that in that moment, uh, the chemistry felt right, and you know, I understood what my role was, much like Aaron understood what his role is in this whole story, and that's how I was approaching it. Like, okay, just you know, your mom dies, you don't want to be living on the space station. You really want to know if there's other kids there. Are you going to be alone? I think they mentioned that in this episode. One of the lines was, are there going to be other kids there?
And your dad
Will
says,
there be other?
lots of them. I was like,
Yeah,
they're like 11.
Yeah, there weren't lots.
And I can't tell you how many episodes I thought Aaron was your age. I thought that for 3 or 4 episodes. I really did think Aaron was, because
Yeah.
I'd never seen him out of makeup. And I just assumed he was 13, 14, or 15 or 16, but no more than 16.
Yeah. I did too, by the way. The both of us did. So I felt the same way. No, I did too. I felt like I had another kid there that was going through the same thing as me, except he had to wear this whole thing, and that made it even worse for him. So I was like, well, you know what? It's not so bad. There's a kid who's got it worse than me. and then I see him out of makeup, and I'm like, he says hello, and I'm like, who? I gave him the look like I don't know who you are, And he's like, you don't remember me, And he starts playing with you because he knows that I don't know. And he says, you don't remember me? I'm like, you don't know who I am? I'm like, I'm sorry, man. I don't. He's like,
you're like, are these the
Nog.
crazy Star Trek fans I've been hearing about?
Yeah. He's like, it's me, Nog. And I'm like, Nog? You're like an adult, bro. I couldn't believe it.
That was a surprise to me too, and really. But let's go back, if I may. Sorry to monopolize the questions here, but Melissa, what did Aaron think after shooting the pilot? Had he? I know Aaron well enough to know that he must have felt a little trepidatious about the whole thing. That he was sure that he hadn't done as good a job as he had hoped to do. He always felt that way, and he was always wrong. He always did a terrific job. So, did he feel during the pilot that he had done what he set out to do?
I don't know if he felt that he had set out what he had planned or hoped to do, because, as you said, he was his own worst critic. So there was always something that he felt he could have done better, or prepared better for. But ultimately, at the end of the day, rewatching this episode, I think he was proud of the work he did. Looking at it from a more mature perspective, and seeing what he had accomplished at such a young age. I mean, he was 23 when he started Deep Space Nine, playing this little kid, but still, he was still a child in a way, in his own right, when he started the show. So initially, I don't know that he would have said that he did a great job, but he was always hopeful, and that always made him work as hard as he possibly could. So
well, I remember working with
back.
him early on, and was really impressed by his work. Just really impressed. And again, I just assumed he was 15 or 16. I didn't think he would be 23. And my mistake, my bad, as we said on Buffy. Um, but he it was just a joy to work with. And then as I got to know you better, Sir Rocket, you too. I mean, the scenes where they were kind enough to put you in my bar and you were interviewing me and as one character to another character, those were some of my favorite scenes I ever did in the show. So
Armin, I was watching you in this, there was a moment where you first come on camera, the first time we see Quark on Deep Space Nine, and you're cleaning up your bar from a mess. I guess, the mess was everywhere. The whole place was in tatters, but Cisco's walking on. He's getting the kind of introduction. This is the ship and this is the place. You're already there. You're not only there, but you're ready to leave. You're like, I've been here, done that. There's no more juice in this lemon, and I've squeezed it all out. I'm ready to get out of here. And that's one thing on this rewatch that I didn't notice before was how they actually literally make you the community leader. Essentially the life. Yeah, you're the lifeblood of the promenade. Like the ship, the station is dead without Quark. So you're the heart of it. You're the lifeblood of the life of the station. I basically said the life of the station. And they mentioned that right away early on. And I want to know, was there more discussion about Quark really being the life of the state? There is no energy there without you, essentially. Once you start picking up the energy, everyone else feeds off of it.
Well, I don't know what was in the writers' heads. As you know, the writers and the actors didn't really see each other until the third season. Thank you, Mr. Berman. But I do know, ironically, the very words you just said are almost word for word what Ira said to me in the last episode, which was the reason you're still on the ship is that you are the ship. You are the heart and soul. Not me, not Armin, but Quark is the heart and soul of the ship. So yes, I guess that was always part and parcel of how they saw it. Certainly, I was grateful because if that's true, that's why so many scenes took place in Quark's bar. Not so much to feature Quark, but to feature the other characters having tete-a-tetes with each other about what they're going to do next in each episode. And it was comfortable for them to be in Quark's bar, to hobnob and come up with strategy. Certainly, it was the resting place for a lot of people to come and just relax.
Another thing they set in stone with this first episode is the gamesmanship between Quark and Cisco. He's leveraging the release of Nog.
They're sizing each other up too a bit, yeah.
Yeah, and that continues to go out throughout the show. I feel like this is the beginning of that. You see that. You got to let me go. If I don't do this, then I won't get that. There's this always back and forth between Cisco and Quark, like, I see you're in a predicament there. You might need some help,
Yeah, it's true. That was set up in the first episode. I would differ with what you said and say that in my memory, which is getting faded as the years go by, there weren't that many scenes with Quark and Cisco. There weren't that many. And I attribute to that, and that's my point of view, not necessarily anybody else's, is that in order for Quark to survive on the show and not get locked up or penalized for some of the activities that he took part in, you had to keep him away from Cisco, because if Cisco didn't catch him continually at what he was doing nefariously, that would make Cisco look less competent. And so in order to keep Cisco's authority, he leave it to Odo to catch Quark, but don't leave it to Cisco, because if he misses something, that says something about his ability to be the commander in chief of the station.
That's a good
point.
You
allude to that. Yeah.
Also, Cisco has his mind on other things outward.
Yeah, he doesn't want to worry about a tiny little arrangement. Yeah.
But there's an allusion to that in the episode. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Melissa. Yeah.
No, I was. You can continue your thought because this kind of segues
Ooh,
back to
stay tuned
something
for
else.
No, I want to hear. I want to hear what you have to say.
Okay. Well, I was just gonna say because that confrontation between Cisco and Quark kind of lays the foundation for relationship as far as the Ferengi families go and Ferengi family unit, because in order to leverage the release of his nephew, that must mean that family is very important to the Ferengi. Otherwise, he would be like, "No, I'm still going," and which is a wonderful nugget to plant, the wonderful seed to plant for the future, and show us where the show is going. It is about relationship and family, and this is the most important overall story for the show, which I
I
thought
think
was
you're 100%
awesome.
right. It was always about family.
Mhm.
You know, we have the Ciscos, we have the Ferengi family, we have the O'Brien family.
Yep.
We have other families that come in, but family was very important to the creation of this show, and it's because we weren't going anywhere. So you couldn't. It would be wrong to leave the family behind. And so the family was important into the makeup of these characters. And I think the characters are richer because we know their relationships with their family members,
Totally.
where they can let their hair down and tell each other the secrets that are bothering them.
And their own interpersonal conflicts too. I mean, these
Yeah.
are still real people that aren't just soldiers or scientists. They still have, a wife or a niece or a nephew or, dinner. Like it's great to see these kinds of moments and their conflicts and their storylines within the families.
And originally, just as a point of fact, there's no reason for Sirach to remember, but in the original script, Rom did not have a name. He was simply Quark's brother.
I
He was
think
described as a family
Pit
member.
Boss.
I
Quark's
think it was
brother.
right. Pit Boss, I think was what it
Pit boss.
was called in the
Quark's
first
brother. Yeah,
scene or the first
that's right.
episode.
He was called a
And
pit boss. My mistake. He wasn't called Quark's brother. It's described. He says offhand, "I'm Quark's
Mhm.
brother," but right, he had no name. It was simply Pit Boss. Yeah.
And he
Wow.
did have a little bit, another little snippet of a scene that I hadn't noticed in previous episodes, or at least I hadn't remembered. And it was when the Cardassians had won something. They're like, yeah, and they're all
Yeah.
collecting stuff. And then in the little corner, in between all the
Yeah.
Cardassians, you see Rom kind of like looking up, like, boy, these guys are
Yeah.
savages or something like that. We do have to jump to a break. I did want to point out very quickly that Sirach, this might be, if you're talking about Griffith Park, and if that's the case, this might be the lake where you shot. Might look a little bit familiar. That kind of tree
Maybe.
hills. Who knows?
Yeah.
Anyway, let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Armin Shimerman, of course, on the Seventh Rule. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Seventh Rule with Sirach Lofton, Armin Shimerman, Melissa Longo, and Ryan Tiesk. So, where did we leave off? I don't quite recall, but there's a lot more to discuss.
1992, I think.
Yeah, it was 92. Yeah.
Melissa's birthday, January 3rd, 1993,
That's it.
which means this was shot in 1992, no doubt. Oh, Armin, do you remember, was this more than a 2-week shoot? It really, when I was watching it, it really felt like there's no way to cram all this in 2 weeks.
I think it was 2 weeks.
Wow.
It could have been. I don't think it was more than 2 weeks. I think it was 2 weeks. And one of the things that you haven't touched upon, there's no reason why you should. But during half of that shoot, we didn't have the trill yet. We didn't have the Dax. So we were shooting, and we were all saying, "Well, when do we get the Dax actress?" And they hadn't cast her yet. They hadn't cast her yet.
One thing
So
that I thought for sure, as far as like the timing of the shoot, I remember my first thought when seeing the Enterprise was that that's some of their first days, because I would think production wise they're still building the Deep Space Nine set, but the Next Generation set is wide open. Maybe they're on the Christmas holiday break or something like that. It's maybe early or mid-December or something like that. You shoot that first, you shoot the exterior while people are building the Deep Space Nine set.
No, that set was finished. At least the promenade. I can't tell you about ops, but the Promenade, which was Soundstage 7, was completely finished.
Wow.
And I don't know about Ciroc, but I felt about Ciroc's age when I walked onto the set because it was incredible. It was
humongous.
It was humongous, and it was totally out of this world, and gorgeous, gorgeous, and everything about every little thing had been finished by the time that I stepped on stage for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, unlike TNG or other shows, I've worked on a lot of shows. Everything's in a little. It's cut off. It's a little piece here, a little piece there, and the camera moves and doesn't show you that there's an interruption between one piece to the next. But on Deep Space Nine, everything was there just as you saw it on the screen. The distance from Quark's bar to Odo's office was exactly the same for 7 years.
Incredible.
And you walked there. I mean, it was an e-ride from Disneyland. It was gorgeous and wonderful, and as I've said many, many times, I felt like I had won the lottery because I was a huge Star Trek fan, and so to actually be on a completed set.
If I'm not mistaken, they said that was the largest single set built on a soundstage till that point, at least.
It was. There's nothing. Even after Deep Space Nine, I've rarely been on sound stages that were as complete and huge and like that. I mean, the soundstage is huge, and every inch of it, except a little, passageways behind the set, was taken up by the set. So, and they must have put millions of dollars of construction into that set, and that was just the Promenade. They still had to create ops and some of the other places that they used.
Boy, to be on that set.
Two stories, too, by the way. Yeah, 2 stories, by the way.
I mean, when you sat there with Aaron with your legs hanging over hanging over the second story.
That wasn't green screen. That was real. Yeah.
I'd been on one set only that was comparable to that, and that was the first G.I. Joe movie. It was the giant sound stages in Paramount in Downey. It was like different Paramount in Downey. And it was 3 floors, 360 degrees, certain details that a camera would never pick up 100 feet out. So I can only imagine this is the same thing, even more so with Deep Space Nine, because the camera will pick it up at some point, whether it's season 4, episode 5, at some point they will be shooting almost every nook and cranny of that station.
Right. We had a third story to Quark that was hardly ever used, but it was there from day one.
Really, a third story?
I remember one episode where they had us up there. We had to go up there and shoot, and I thought, I didn't even know that place existed. It had always been there. But we had to climb up to that third story to do something, look down on the bar, they did a phenomenal job of construction. And as Ciroc and everybody else knows, the Okudas would leave little notes for us that every now and then you'd look down and there'd be a little snippet of something written on, and the Okudas had left some sort of message for the actors and the crew.
Like what? Like blocking, or just something sweet, like Happy Tuesday?
My favorite one, and it doesn't apply to this first episode, but there was the Far Beyond the Stars where I was playing a character that wasn't Quark. And on my desk, it said, and the character's name was Herb. It was supposedly a note from the boss of the character that Renee was playing. It said, Herb, the idea of a teenager slaying vampires just won't work. When I happened to note, I mean, it wasn't obvious. I'm doing something while the camera's getting ready, and I look down and there's an Okuda note, and I went, oh, that's funny. That's funny.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I used to spend time in between shots going up to the panels and just trying to read what was secretly encoded in the back. Yeah, whose name was really in there?
So they left Easter eggs for the actors.
Yeah, well, not just for the actors, but for the crew.
It was just for themselves, really.
Yeah. Wow.
But we would catch it because we were there long enough. You stand on the set and you're looking around. You're like, "Hey, what does that say, anyways?" And you look at the plaque or you look at something, and then you'll see that it actually says something completely hilarious.
Yeah, there's a plaque somewhere on the soundstage of the Promenade. It was a metal plaque, and I actually checked it out one day, and it was all the producers' names were written on the plaque, which I kind of liked as well.
Exactly. Yeah, and even all of the set designers, they had so many people in there that were credited in those panels and those instrument panels that were all the guys in the back end doing all the stuff off camera. So I'm glad that secretly they have their kudos all inside of the paneling. But I did like the fact that, you know, Quark took a big stand about he didn't like being called a thief. You know, I'm a gambler, fine, admitted. But I'm not a thief, you know. I'm a hustler. I might hustle you. I might finagle a few things, but I'm not a all out thief. And I like that. To me, also showed that Quark stands on some principles that he's not. It's not like there's no limit to where he'll go. There's limits. He does care about his image, for example. He doesn't want to be perceived as that.
Thank you for that. And I will go one step further and say I thought Quark, and this is coming from the actor who played Quark, that he was one of the more ethical people on the show. And it may not have been human ethics.
Right.
But we did have the rules of acquisition. And yes, you can go so far, but there are rules, and you're allowed to do certain things that perhaps the humans don't agree with, but it was okay for the ethos of that particular species. And I think he tried to follow those as best he could. That's why he spouted the rules so often, is that those were his 10 commandments.
That's also why he was so conflicted, as such a conflicted character, was because he tried to follow the laws of his particular culture to a T and become successful and good in their value system. But he was also conflicted because these humans and all these others were convincing him to do other things that also kind of felt right sometimes.
Right. If I may, I remember being influenced by something that I heard Patrick Stewart say, not on Star Trek, long before he ever heard of Star Trek, when he was a young man, probably about 26 years old, on a TV show out of BBC called Mastering Shakespeare, where he had played Shylock. And he said he was a character who had his own rules of ethics, but was living amongst a lot of foreigners. This is Shylock in that play. And he has to, just as what you said, Ryan, he has his own ethics from the way he was brought up, but yet he's also being pulled by the ethics of the foreign alien society that he's living in. And I remember thinking, that is a great, that's it. That is a great thing for me to follow as I played Quark, was your own ethos, but being influenced by the people you're living with.
Wow. The scene in Quark's bar when the Cardassians are getting rowdy and Kira shuts down everything and says this bar is now closed. Something popped into my head, wondering, was Quark in on that? Because
he had to be in on that.
Yeah,
he's not going to let all that gold go out of the door. He's getting that gold back.
Theory.
And he handed.
I thought the same thing.
He handed Odo to them, so he was essential in helping to plant Odo on the Cardassian
There's
ship.
no way he's going to be used without him knowing. He's in on that.
Yeah.
Kira did not pull a fast one on him.
I cannot confirm nor deny.
There's no way. I was like, he's in on it. I'm like, he got that gold back. He went right to that. There should have been a scene where Quark's at the panel, opening that same panel.
Well, and
that gold.
Yeah, the way he was handling the lab.
But he's not a thief, though.
Not a thief. He's not a thief.
No.
But it belongs to me, so it's like I'm just retrieving stuff.
Right.
I let you touch it. Now I'm taking it back.
Exactly. I'll keep it here for you when you realize it's gone.
Right here. Right.
Oh yeah, that
Oh
was
my
that was. I thought the
gosh.
same thing, Melissa. I was like,
Yeah,
Quark is totally in on this. He knows what's going on.
he has to be
Um,
in on it,
he has to be. So
right?
yeah, he has to be. But
Well,
you know what else I thought?
I will tell you, it wasn't until about 3 or 4 episodes further on that I really discovered who Quark was. So I'm flying
Mm,
by the seat of my pants. This is sort of why I asked Melissa about Aaron, because in that first episode, yes, I was doing all the stuff that I auditioned with, but but I didn't really know who the character was. I know what I didn't want to do. That was clear to me. I did not want to do the Ferengi I had played in Next Generation. I did not want to do that,
Mhm.
but I didn't know who the character was, and it wasn't until can't remember which episode, but I went, oh, this is who he is. Okay, so whatever
mm,
you saw, it's still a fledgling plastic sort of performance as I'm figuring it out. I mean, we don't know who our characters are in that first episode. I believe most of us, I won't say all of us, most of us are trying to flesh out the characters as we think the writers see them, as
Mhm.
think
Mhm.
the writers have the way we auditioned in order to get the writers and the producers' approval. But as the episodes go on, I think we all begin to think of who are we, what are we doing, and we start to form our own ideas about the character, which may or may not line up with the writers. I'm pretty sure my idea of what the court character should be and what the writers wanted the character to be was not the same. But eventually they had to put up with the actor that they had cast and had to follow as best they could and still try to have their vision fulfilled as
Mhm.
well.
I
Um,
wonder if I wonder if we could get you to remember when that aha moment was, because that would be really
I can tell
interesting.
you what it is. I just can't remember what the episode was.
Mhm.
But I remember being in Ops. Surprisingly enough, it wasn't on the promenade. It wasn't in the bar. It was in Ops. So the first time Quark appears in Ops, that
Mhm.
would be the aha moment where I went, "Oh, that's who I am." I remember that moment distinctly. I just can't remember the title of the episode.
Wow. When we first see that episode coming up, and sometime in the next
Yeah,
handful,
it's
we're
the
gonna know
first
that
time that
was
my
it.
character is on Ops, and he's looking at a
is
panel.
it
I remember looking at a panel.
Babel?
It might be. I was thinking
Oh,
that
might have
too.
been
That's
Babel. Might have
episode
been Babel.
4, I think.
Because I think that's the first time he's in ops because nobody else can understand each other. So
They're speaking
Odo
gibberish.
deputizes Quark to help him run the station.
It might be that one. Yeah, it could be. But I just remember looking at that panel in Ops, and all of a sudden, everything fell into place. It was an aha moment. I went, "Oh, that's who this character is. I
Mm,
got it." And then I felt very comfortable playing that version of myself that I had conceived of at
Mhm.
that moment. In
Oh, that's
fact,
amazing.
talking about the first episode, one thing that I remember quite distinctly, forgive me, was I used the voice that I had used for the Ferengi on the TNG episodes, so that I'm looking at Kira and I said, uh, "I love a woman in uniform," and that's the way I played it, like that. And when that episode was over, when the pilot was over, all of us, I'm assuming Sirach, you did too, you had to go into Berman's office and get notes. We did. All of us had to get notes. And the first thing
I never went. I never got notes though. So
no, you didn't have to go into Berman's office to get
no,
notes. We all
no.
did. The rest of us did.
Okay.
They weren't terrible notes. They were, in fact, this was a great note that he gave me. The first thing he said to me was, "Armin, lose the voice." Now we've already shot the pilot. Lose the voice. And I went, great, fine. And I'm grateful for that because he was absolutely right.
Armin,
Absolutely.
do you know if he said the same thing to Max? Because Max's voice absolutely changed pretty quickly.
I don't know. I do know, as Melissa was saying about Aaron, that all of us were influenced by the last outpost, which Max told me once when he played Ferengi on Next Generation. They were sent, the actors playing Ferengi were sent to the last outpost to see what a Ferengi was like. And as everyone knows, I've been apologizing for that episode ever since. Uh, but I don't know. Next time I speak to Max, Ryan, I will ask him if he got that note. I know I did. And
It was that quick. It was that quick. It was just lose the voice real quick.
Yeah, there was one other note, which is funny in retrospect. But because of the teeth and because of the voice, I couldn't say commander. It came out commander, commander. He said to me, I remember this distinctly. He said, Armin, we already have one Irishman on the show. We don't need two.
Irishman, Ferengi, whatever.
Oh, that's great.
Rick Berman's funny sometimes. He can be funny. He can be funny.
Wow.
Oh man, that's hilarious.
And I was so happy when Avery got promoted, so I didn't have to say commander anymore.
Yeah, no more commander. Commander. That was another thing I noticed watching the pilot was that it was kind of another element of the storyline was O'Brien saying goodbye to the next generation. It was a subtle kind of rift in the background, but it was there. The moment was there. Picard, had that kind of beam him out of the Enterprise onto Deep Space Nine type moment, and I thought, wow, this is kind of him moving from one show to another, and that's him, taking the baton over and carrying it over onto Deep Space Nine. And that was an element I didn't really pay that much attention to in the beginning, but in this watch, I noticed how much of the O'Brien storyline was kind of the handing over of next generation.
They were
credibility.
Wise. They were very wise to do that because, as we all know, Colin Meaney is an incredibly phenomenal actor. Mm-hmm. And to see the rise of his character from TNG, from the first episodes that he was in TNG to series regular on Deep Space Nine, is a compliment to Cullum's extraordinary talent. He was rock solid from the very first day and was always solid. And how he did it, I'm going to tell him a little. I'm not going to tell you how he did it because I don't know how he did it, but I know that he would come in for camera rehearsals and have no idea what a scene was about, not whatsoever. He hadn't read the script; he wasn't ready, and he would just go to camera rehearsal, read the lines flatly, and then in the half an hour it took for them to light whatever scene that he was in, he would be brilliant when he came back.
I saw him do that with my own eyes too. I've seen him many times, not just once. I've seen him many times come into a blocking early morning with the minis in his hands and he's fumbling through it.
the donut minis.
Yeah. No, the miniature scripts. And then he'll he'll go through it, he'll read it and then, fumble through it. And then like Armin is saying, 30 minutes later, you don't have to worry about him.
Yeah, I would spend every moment of the day when I got the script, whenever I got a new script, thinking about what I was going to do and still not sure about what I was going to do when I was in front of the camera. And that would be 48 hours or so. But he would do all that in a half hour and not only have the decisions made, but have it memorized. He didn't know what the words were when he came in. Wow. Then he memorizes it as well as decisions. This is extraordinary talent and a quickness that is astounding.
Sounds stressful for directors and producers. Maybe that's why Rick Berman said, well, I already got one Irishman. I don't want two.
No, I don't think that's the case. But it is, I don't think enough is said about Colin Meaney. I understand when I'm on, we're focusing on other things because I didn't have that many scenes with Colin. But Colin Meaney is an extraordinary actor who should get more acclaim. God knows his careers outside of Star Trek has been extraordinary, one to be envied. But and rightfully so because he deserves it. He deserves the acclaim and the success that he's had. He's an extraordinary actor.
We only have a few minutes left, but I actually just remembered very quickly. Sorry, Sirach, did you have something you wanted to add to that before I change?
2 words: easy and effortless. That's what I remember. It was easy for him, and it seemed effortless when you looked at him do it. It was just like
Lucky.
he's like, this guy is, he's just right on point, and once he's got it, it's in. So I do remember that about Colin. He's an extraordinarily gifted actor and able to get it right in so little time. So little time.
That's that. And may I ask about getting it right on our show? Even from the very first, we had to say the words exactly as written on the page. Now, as a young man, Sirach, were you required to do that as well? Because obviously they could sort of say to you, well, I guess you can fudge the words a little. But did you have to be a DLP as well?
DLP,
Yeah,
baby.
no, they wanted that. Yeah, they were adamant about that. And just in my own OCD way, I want to remember things word for word. So, I feel like you're not doing justice if you don't remember the script. Like, my entrance into the acting was doing the Martin Luther King speech and the I Have a Dream speech. And so I was adamant to get the I Have a Dream speech right. You're not going to, you can't just wing it.
Yeah.
You can't wing it. I had a dream, and you know what I'm saying.
And you were there, and you were there, and you were there.
Yeah. You can't wing it. It's got to be. You got to pay homage. So to me, I feel like all of acting should be approached with that kind of reverence, that you respect the words that the writers put down, or you respect the historical meaning of speeches and monologues or whatnot. So yeah, I think it's important to do it right. Now, there's certain times when I felt like sentences didn't sound right. Like I don't see myself formatting a sentence in that way, and I would maybe reconstruct a sentence if it felt more comfortable to say it in this particular way.
Really, I don't. Good for you. So they allowed you to do that, because I know if I tried to do that, they would say no. Judy Brown, the script coordinator, would say we have to do it again because it wasn't DLP. DLP, dead letter, perfect.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, Sirach's told us many a time about DLP.
DLP, lovey.
Yeah, lovey.
DLP.
That's what it is.
That's what you wanted to hear. You didn't want to hear that's a print or anything. You wanted Judy to say DLP. That means
because Judy had like essentially final say over whether a shot got printed or not. So yeah, it might look great. The camera might be right. The measurements are right. The focus was in. Everything. The sound was great. But then it would all hinge on Judy. And if Judy says, and she would, you would always know, because she would have there would be this pause, and she's looking down at the script, and she would be like, Sirach, you said.
Oh no!
Like, as soon as you hear
Sirach,
you said, you're like, oh god, it's on me, isn't it? My fault.
But I think that need to get a DLP all the time was not only instructive for you and me but the others as well. So it was an inspiration to try to do the best you could. That you couldn't, forgive me, you couldn't fuck around. You had to do it according to Hoyle, and you had to do it as best you could. And because the cast, not only the main cast, but the supporting cast as well, were such phenomenally good actors, that you just didn't want to look bad in comparison to them, including yourself. And
so that was that's my entire experience, is just being around great actors like yourself, great actors like Renee and Colin and Avery, and essentially you just don't want to be the cause of the mess up. Like, if we have to do it again, it's not because of me. It's basically playing the game of not it. Like, not it.
And if I may, I think that's one of the criteria between the differences between the ethos on our show and the ethos, at least on the two shows that surrounded us. That both Next Generation and Voyager, wonderful shows in their own right, had more fun doing their show because they could fool around. They could fool around. And I attribute a great deal of this to Avery. As we all know, number one on the call sheet sets the tone, and Avery was number one on the call sheet. he set the tone for we're going to do our work, and we're going to do it as well as we possibly can. And all these elements fit into the ethos of doing the very best we could. So you can imagine our disappointment when we were all striving to do the very best we could, and yet we always felt for years that we were considered to be second class to those other shows, which is now changed. Thankfully, thanks to streaming, I believe our show, thanks to programs like this, the Seventh Rule, people have a great appreciation for the work we did. But it took 30 years for people to appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
It took Sirach to grow up into a wonderful young man.
Well,
you still get called a young man. That's a good deal.
Yeah, thank you, Armin.
Armin,
I'm talking about the Sirach behind Ryan.
Oh, okay. What a relief. Before you go, Armin, I did want to ask you very quickly about makeup, which is probably a very tired conversation, but Odo's makeup very clearly and obviously was changed somewhere down the line. It's well documented, but I also noticed a change in your makeup. Quark looked a little bit different. It's subtle, and I wonder if
in the first episode,
yeah.
I wonder if there are conversations about it, or if you remember any kind of changes.
No, there was a change, and the reason was we were talking about the sets being completed, but my makeup wasn't. And I believe if I have it right, don't quote me, and it's that I believe in the first episode I was wearing a non-Quark nose.
It was the nose.
And that's what it looked like.
And right, and the area kind of around it,
around the cheekbones.
And so that was finally finished by the second episode, and so that first episode, the makeup is not correct. I think there's pictures from the day we did publicity before the show actually started to film. If you remember that picture with all of us, Sirach, were standing there. And we all look like deer in the headlights because this is the first time we've seen the press. And what the fuck is this? And I remember that that's not my makeup either. I'm looking at this, it's just not my makeup. And if I may, very quickly, it's probably not important, but one of the things that made my character's makeup better, outstanding, is a little liberty that my makeup artist, Karen Westerfield, did. If you look, yes, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Look at the red underneath my eyes, and it actually goes all the way around. It's hard in that picture to tell, but it goes all the way around my eyes. And Karen, on her first day of work, decided to do that. And then when her boss, Michael Westmore. Sorry. When Michael Westmore saw that, when her boss saw what she had done on her own initiative, he was furious. I remember him storming into the trailer and said, "What did you do?" Wow. And she said, "Well, I thought it would make his blue eyes stand out better," which it did. And so because we had already shot it that way for several days, it was too late. You couldn't change it. And I am grateful, very grateful for Karen's initiative, because it did make my eyes stand out. And with all that makeup on, the only thing you have as an actor, for me anyway, to convey things to an audience is through the eyes and through the specifics that you have about the way you say the lines.
Your eyes and your voice. Well,
none of this is available. None of this is available to use because it's all covered. It's all plastic.
Even something as simple as eyebrows and expressions.
Right.
Can't do it.
So it was incumbent to have.
So they kept the highlights around the eyes for the rest of the show.
Yeah, they couldn't change it because we had set it up. But she got into a little bit of hot water for doing that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Well, I was going to make a bad joke. Glad I didn't. Screw it. It's because that first day it looked like this. There was just too much eye makeup.
Oh, come
Armin,
on.
that's what the problem was. No, that's
Exactly.
Robert Smith of The Cure. Everybody knows.
Uh,
But thank you,
Thankfully, I
Armin.
didn't have to wear makeup. I didn't have to wear lipstick. And speaking of makeup, very quickly, and you talked about Renee. For the first 3 years of the show, because Renee's makeup came all the way down to his lips, mine didn't, but came down to his lips. During lunch, he couldn't eat anything that would require him to chew. So he had yogurt for 3 years running for lunch because he could sort of sip yogurt. He could sort of spoon that in because if he ate something that where the masticated where he had to chew, it would break up the makeup. So he was a dutiful actor and he didn't break up the makeup. After 3 years, he said, "The hell with this! I'm going to have lunch." And then,
Wow.
The show's still going
Wow.
on. All right. Never mind. I'm eating.
I'm eating.
Well, Armin, this has been so cool. We hope to have you again sometime. And we
You
really,
will.
what a relief. We really
No,
love
we love
having you
having
and we
you.
truly appreciate
Yeah.
you.
It's great fun, and it's you guys are terrific, and I love being with you on the screen. I prefer being with you in person, but if I can't be with you in person, this is a nice way to share.
And
Let's
our
make
love
it
to
happen.
Kitty too, as well.
Yeah.
Please give our love to her.
Mhm.
I will. She's out. She's finally gotten out after being sick for 2
Oh, I
weeks.
bet that's got to feel great. Finally. All right. Well, thanks very much. Everybody stick around. We've got a couple more segments to go. A couple more segments? We're spoiling you. We'll see you on the other side. Armin, thank you so much. And we'll be right back. Oh, wait. Speaking of spoiling people, let's give a very special thanks to Homer Frizzell, Dr. Anne-Marie Siegel, Eve England out in Wales, Yvette Blackman, Carmen, a.k.a. Skillet, TJ Jackson Bay out in Missouri, Bill Victor Arukin, Titus Muller, Darlena Marie, Dr. Mohammed Noor, Tierney C. Diekman, Anna Post, Rex A. Wood, Anil O. Palat, Joe Balsarati, Mike Gu, DQ, Neil Akasaka, Justine Norton Kurtzen, Dr. Stephanie Baker, Carrie Schwent, Faith Howell, Edward Foltz, My Live from Tokyo, Matt Boardman, Chris McGee, Justin Weir, Jake Barrett, Jane Jorgensen, and of course, Dr. Susan V. Gruner. We'll be right back on The Seventh Rule. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to The Seventh Rule. This is our version of the free-for-all, since, we kind of invented it, so I guess it's the only version of the free-for-all. But Melissa, myself, and Sirach are here, of course. We are joined by Carrie Schwent, wearing a freaking amazing shirt, by the way, made by J.J. Lendl. My live in Tokyo, is also wearing a freaking amazing hooded sweatshirt made by Melissa.com. Kinda.
Kinda.
Dr. Susan V. Gruner is wearing a cool shirt too, but I can't see what it. There it is.
Oh.
It's an Uhura shirt made by Melissa as well. Matt Boardman, I don't know, but he's wearing a cool Under Armour hat. We like those. And Galdu Scott Jensen is here as well, wearing a shirt from Abyssinian Kiosk. Wow, we are underdressed here today. Sirach and myself. Melissa's even got a great shirt from the Deep Space Nine documentary. All right, so
game up.
First things first, we had a couple things prepared for this segment. We're going to take you back all the way to 2019 when we first reviewed this episode. And a friend of ours was talking about it, and he said a little something like this. Let's see if we can pull that up. He said this.
This is so Star Trek. And I was like, wow, how did people miss that in that pilot? You know, they always say the first 2 years, but we came out of the gate with those elements.
So that was our beloved friend, Mr. Aaron Eisenberg, the first time we talked about this episode back in 2019. And he kind of brought up the thought of, like, people were saying this didn't feel like Star Trek because they weren't going anywhere. And I'm sure you guys have all heard that before, but I don't know. Sirach, did you hear that at 13, or did you only hear that kind of like later on?
I didn't hear the "we're not Star Trek" talk.
Mm-hmm.
I heard more of like, it's dark.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, that's all I got. Was I remember the dark, 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 dark. It's a dark show. It's dark. And yeah, the set was dark when you compare it to Next Generation set, which was a lot brighter. And you could see the contrast in this episode when O'Brien is going back and forth, and you get to see the stylistic designs. That was one thing I noticed, that when Dukat came on the ship, how much his uniform or his outfit resembled the architecture of the station. So I said, "Oh, that's really cool," because the same style of architect is in the wardrobe, and it is it matches. But no, I never heard that we weren't Star Trek, and I would even say that it seemed to be very Star Trek when I was watching this episode. It seemed to be, when they were talking about the wormholes and the prophets and these orbs. They went in. They started with the Wolf 359 and the whole taking you right into the action.
Man,
I felt there was a lot of Star Trek in this episode. And the other thing I wanted to say, and we didn't get to cover it, but was how great Sisko's performance was in this episode. Avery delivered like a masterful performance in this episode from start to finish. I really love the moments that, for example, when he first meets Kira and he's like, she's like, "I suppose you want the office." And he's like, "Oh, I thought I'd say hello first." But yeah. He's like, "Yeah, I'll take the office." I thought it was it was just a great line. And I thought the scenes that he did opposite of Patrick Stewart, where Patrick Stewart says to him to the effect of something like, "Well, in the meantime," and Sisko interrupts him.
Meantime.
Yeah. And he's like, "In the meantime,
I was
I'll
like,
carry out my
whoa, I don't
orders."
want to be on the receiving end of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he's saying, "I'm going to follow my orders and carry out my duty," but he's also saying it like, "Don't tell me what I'm going to be doing." So I love that. And, there were certain things I had nitpicks with, which we can get into later, but for the most part, really, Avery's performance was just stand out. I love the moments with Jennifer Sisko when he kind of finds himself on the beach with the lemonade and he's like trying to figure out what's going on. And he gets in, he's like, "Wait a minute, I was standing here holding this, and then wait a minute, you're the girl that I love. This is the best thing ever. I get to relive this moment."
Or no, maybe it wasn't a woohoo. Maybe it was an ow.
It was
I heard Jake doing an ow at one point too, when at the end of the episode, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, so it was fun to watch that. Those moments, I thought he delivered them really great. The moment where he's feeling like, "I don't know what's going on. I got to figure this out." He showed the right emotions in the when he's talking to the prophet aliens. The way that he's talking with them, trying to explain something that's very hard to explain, like baseball's hard to explain, let alone the idea of time, right?
Right. I wrote greatest definition of baseball ever.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And then the moment where he's crying and they keep saying, "Why do you live in this moment?" They keep saying that and bringing it back to the Jennifer Sisko dying moment. And they keep saying, "Living in this moment, you keep bringing us here." And he thinks they're bringing him. They're bringing him there, and they're like, "No, you're bringing us here." And I felt that was also the realization that he's living in that moment, and he won't let go of that. And him crying that out, I thought that was just like as good as it gets as far as a performance can go.
Yeah, some people wait a lifetime for a moment like this. It's a Whitney Houston thing. this magic moment, right? What is that, like Roy Orbison? What about the rest of you? Do you remember any of you, just throw it out if you do. Do you remember any of that 1993 not Star Trek talk, or they're not going out into adventures?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I still hear that now when I'm talking about it with my friends.
Still?
Yeah.
Same.
I smack them down now, though.
Yeah.
I've got enough ammo to fight back now, so.
Yeah.
Wow. I would think that now, like, that people have seen it, they go, okay, this is it. It's a different iteration of Star Trek. It's darkly lit. It's written a little bit more darkly. It's about, as many of them said, it's about traveling inward rather than outward. But I mean, it's very much the ideals of Star Trek, and it's got Cardassians.
Well, and the speech that Sisko gives to the prophets on the baseball diamond about we're not here to conquer you, we're here to learn and explore and coexist with you. That is so Star Trek. That's the epitome of Star Trek. And just because you can't see it superficially, you have to dig deeper. It doesn't make it any less Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you've got that great quote in there too. It is the unknown that defines our existence.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
That just jumped right out at me when I was watching it again.
That's why everybody attributes baseball to Deep Space Nine. I love that. That should be a question we do one of these days, where it's like, baseball is the sport that we connect with Deep Space Nine. What sport do we connect with, like, Voyager or Discovery? I think it's taken Jello shots or something like that.
Curling.
Or beer pong.
You know what?
Matt Boardman, do you mean hurling, like as in like body function, or as in the Olympic sport?
Oh no.
Or baseball can also be a hurler. Anyway. Well, we do have another.
I was going to say really quick on the baseball tip, though. I felt like if Deep Space Nine really, if I could go back and make one tiny adjustment to this episode, the adjustment I would make is I would put, instead of the random baseball player guy who was also a prophet, wormhole alien, I would have that guy be William Sadler.
Wow, deep cut.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just playing it cool, like nothing's
just playing it
on.
cool. You don't know. And then later on when you see it, you're like, wasn't he the guy in the baseball? That I would have thrown that in there as an extra little deep cut.
Chomping on some big league chew.
Yeah.
Strawberry flavor.
Wow.
Well, check out this other clip from when we first reviewed this episode back in May of 2019. Oh, wait. Let me make sure that we've got the sound connected just in case I'd missed that. Okay, here it is. A little something like this.
You live here.
You exist here.
You exist here.
That was the best. I thought the same thing. Best moment.
Yeah.
Right?
So we did kind of cover that a little bit, but I just thought it was fun to have. Right. Well, Melissa, you picked these out. What you wrote about this, your question was, do you still feel this way about this moment? How has the feeling of this moment changed or stayed the same? But we kind of covered a lot of that. What do you think, Melissa? You clearly have some thoughts on this.
Well, yeah. Well, because that moment has changed for me since the first watching of this episode and this watching, because now I definitely relate to where Sisko exists and why he exists there, because nothing in your past experience, nothing in his past experiences had prepared him for that moment of losing his spouse. So I could relate very, very much to him and his struggle and his pain. it was an important moment. I don't know if it's the best moment, but it was definitely an important moment of the episode.
Mm-hmm. And just to add to that, another point that we were kind of discussing, but this is Aaron talking about this a little bit more.
You just expressed how much potential you saw in the show. I remember hearing from fans when I started going to conventions, the opposite. It's not going anywhere. So what they saw is stuck on a station and not trekking to uncharted areas, right?
So they heard it. A lot of them heard it. And I'm sure Aaron, every time anybody said that, I'm sure Aaron didn't go, "Oh, that's an interesting opinion." I'm sure he set them straight. Melissa, I'm sure you were sitting at the table at conventions in the later years when he did do that.
Well, yeah, and he wouldn't set them straight in a mean-spirited way, but he would play with the person at first to say, "Oh, so why do you feel this way? Oh, really? That's interesting. But what about this, this, and this?" And start asking them questions and drilling them about why why they thought that way. And oftentimes they would go away, with a broader perspective or appreciation of Deep Space Nine. Not all of them have changed their minds because people are stubborn sometimes, but But yes, he was passionate about Deep Space Nine and hearing opinions from other people.
Mm-hmm.
What do they mean we don't go anywhere? We moved the ship. We moved the ship in this episode.
That's right. The station got their little six. Their little.
The whole station flies, man.
What were they? Thrusters.
Yeah, station thrusters. Yeah.
And they discovered the other side of the wormhole was the Gamma Quadrant. That's a huge trek.
70,000 light years, if I remember correctly,
right.
According to Mr. Sisko.
I think it's always funny that it's like there's some people who kind of like miss that whole message of what Star Trek really is about. And I mean, it's that exploration of the human equation. And whether you're on a station or you're on a starship, it's like those stories are about, the original series, they were about current events, and it was a way to make a social commentary through, I guess, a parable. And so, I mean, I can't think of anybody who did it better than Deep Space Nine. And I think it's fun to watch it now and to see, like, it's like, okay, this was stuff that was relevant back when the show was written, but it's like, oh my gosh, this stuff is still relevant today. I don't know. I think I think people associate Star Trek with moving along in a starship, but no, I mean, Deep Space Nine did a fantastic job of reviewing that human equation, just in a different setting.
And if we ever end up with sorry, go ahead, Mai.
I was going to say I agree with that entirely, and I think Gene Roddenberry set the pace even with the first series, and right through everybody carried on. All of the creators of the various series have followed on with that because he saw, I think, Star Trek in one sense as a measure of whether or not we're actually ready to go out and see other people and meet other people. Have we evolved enough ourselves? And I think that Deep Space Nine, in the way that it examined things much more closely, interpersonally, different species, and so forth, was really drilling down on what Roddenberry was thinking about in the first place. So I really like that aspect of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And let me add to that, Mai. I want to say, because the opening credits for The Next Generation, Patrick Stewart of Picard says, "These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Its 5-year mission to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before." And
that's the Kirk version. Picard is slightly different. Instead of a 5-year mission, it's continuing mission, and
no one.
Yeah.
Okay, so so they made changes, but it's still structurally the same principle. That is what Star Trek is about, essentially. That's what people who are talking about, what Deep Space Nine are not living up to. It's this idea of boldly going, I guess, or seeking out new life, right? Mm-hmm. And what I would say in contrast to that is, yeah, you could have a show where you keep running into new life every episode, and you meet Vulcans one day, and then you meet the Tellarites and and just every time just keep meeting new life and new forms. But then you wouldn't really have a deep understanding of those cultures, those civilizations, those alien entities, right? And I feel like what we did on this show was get a deep dive into Bajorans, a deep dive into the Ferengi, a deep dive into the Cardassians and the Klingons, and just deep diving into these new life that we've already met, the new civilizations we've met. So I think getting to know them is an exploration. That is the exploration. It doesn't necessarily have to be, new aliens.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. This show has more of an evolution of humanity through its interactions with these various species than almost any other. I think probably more than any other series by a wide margin, in fact.
Mm-hmm. Now, real quick before we hop over to our next segment, we forgot Jake Sisko guesses the IMDb score. Unless you already checked, because we did do it part of the dive. Okay.
Yeah. I'm going to say 8.1 is my guess.
Anybody else have any guesses that hasn't checked recently?
I don't know. I don't think I want to know. It's a 10, definitely.
Yeah, 7.5. That's a little rough for such a great, an objectively good pilot, I would think.
Wow. I thought for a while.
You thought what?
Oh, I was just going to say, I thought this is, for the longest time, this was probably regarded as one of the best pilots for a Star Trek series.
It is. It won last year in the 2022 Lappy Awards, Best Star Trek Pilot. Deep Space Nine won that. We did have 2 non-appearance mentions that I caught. Melissa's already nodding. Who are they?
Keiko and Joseph Sisko.
Yes. Excellent.
I was
even though they may not have even had Joseph Sisko cast yet.
No, but when did they mention
sound like he was dead too? My father.
Oh, that was
that he was.
You know, I forgot that was my nitpick with my nitpick tie, which was that he said, Captain Sisko said, my dad was a famous chef, or he said was
famous chef,
but he very clearly said was.
Right, but maybe he's not in that circle anymore. As far as
that's the headcanon that we have to work with. But it was for the aubergine stew.
Right.
Which is
change continuity.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Well, what happened was the world got larger. And so he was no longer world famous once they expanded the world.
Mm-hmm.
That's all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
See? All right, let's take a quick break and hop over to the other side on the 7th rule. Hey, everybody, we are back on the 7th rule, deep dive of Emissary, which is the first episode of Deep Space Nine. Some would even call it the pilot episode. Here are a few things. Well, we're going to just talk about a few things, a couple things each that we noticed that were a little different. One thing I noticed was the acoustics in the office, in Sisko's office, were terrible, very, very echoey, very noticeable. You could hear footsteps, you could hear echoes. Clearly, they fixed that very quickly because you don't really notice it later on. But having watched 173 episodes and then going back to that first one, suddenly you're like, what's with all this echo? Kai Opaka calls Bajor, or something. It was a little peculiar. Picard calls it Bajor, and then later on calls it Bajor correctly. Right. So I'm thinking it was just like the shoots were a week apart. Like that scene was a week apart, and he heard other people say it, or he was corrected, or something like that. But he knew some Bajorans on Next Generation, so a little peculiar. the computer said it took 2 hours to complete a function of downloading something, which my phone can do that in like nothing flat. We've heard many of the writers say that the plan for this was to be like a Western. And when you're watching it with that in mind, it does feel very much like a Western in that like the dad and the kids show up to this Western town. He's the new sheriff in town. And then there's this kind of problematic person in that one and all that. But then another little piece that I caught was, I'd never thought of this. The shuttlecraft Rio Grande is the river, on, the border between Texas and Mexico. And we know there's a lot of Western history with the Rio Grande. And so I'm sure that was something they also later on had, like the Tecumseh. Sirach, you like the Tecumseh, if I remember correctly. We had a long conversation about that. Also, one more thing, and I was kind of actually wanted to get your reaction on this, Sirach, because now that we've finally seen Encounter at Farpoint in The Next Generation, I noticed a similarity, which was the wormhole aliens seemed to be, in a way, putting Benjamin Sisko on trial. The same in a similar manner to that how Q was putting humanity on trial. There was a similar thing of like they were looking down on him, they were unsure. He convinced them, and they kind of just gave like all right, we'll see. We'll take your word for it for now, but we'll see. And it almost felt like he was on trial the same way that Q put Picard on trial. And the other similarity was Dukat kind of was introduced as a recurring villain in that first episode, the same way that Q was. So the two of them handled both aspects of that same kind of conflict that Q gave in Encounter at Farpoint. I don't know if you gave that any thought.
It was in the back of my mind, but it wasn't articulated the way you just did, and it makes sense to me when you say that.
It's well written, though.
It's a well written script, but it doesn't seem to have the elements. This seems more serious to me, than Encounter at Farpoint.
Totally.
Farpoint seemed like more playful. I didn't really feel a life-threatening moment in that pilot of Encounter at Farpoint. I didn't feel them about to die, even when they were freezing different people, and that
even when some people died.
Even when some people died, I didn't feel like people were dying. I felt like I just didn't feel the stakes were high. In this, I did feel the stakes were high. In this pilot, I did feel. I mean, you have Sisko losing his wife. It started off with a lot of drama, and then even the discovery of the wormhole is what kind of separates it to me as something. Oh, this is something different. So it is an exploratory thing to find the wormhole. So that in itself is kind of, Star Trek-y as it gets when it comes to finding wormholes. So I don't know. I did see similarities, but I also felt a lot of differences too. I enjoyed this better.
Another quick thing was Gilgo Beach. I looked it up because I was like, oh, that's got to be somewhere in New Orleans or something. Nope, Long Island.
It's in New York. Yeah, I looked it up too.
So I'm like, I wonder if Ira added that one. He's like, let's get a beach in the Bronx somewhere or whatever. But there was another place that was mentioned, and I'd love to hear if you know where this is. Where Keiko... Yes. Do you know where that is? Because I looked it up.
It's in Kyushu, yes.
Southern Japan. Near Nagasaki.
There's Hokkaido, and then there's the main island of Honshu. Just to the west is Shikoku, and then the bottom is Kyushu, the bottom piece. And that's where the great ramen comes from. That's where Keiko comes from, apparently.
Cool.
Were there a couple new observations that you caught this time, or new feelings that you hadn't ever felt or noticed before?
And yes, there were, and they were triggered by watching the first review that you guys did. I think that was an incredible review. I loved watching Aaron doing that. And there was talk about how this was like jumping into a story from like chapter 2. Just the action is going and you're expected to keep up. It wasn't like a, okay, once upon a time kind of beginning to things. It just jumped straight in, and I love that aspect of it. But he said, why do we keep ourselves in certain parts of our lives? Why do we continue to exist in certain areas that we don't want to let go for some reason? Our lives are not linear because we hold on to everything that makes us who we are. I think, to me, that was really, really poignant. When we talked about the last episode, I said to Ira that the title, What We Leave Behind, is the antithesis of We Leave Nothing Behind. And it was curious that Cisco uses that same phrase to explain the past to wormhole alien Jennifer as well. And I think that this is what Aaron's alluding to here. This cumulative effect of who we are makes our lives nonlinear. A lot happened to me last year. A lot has happened to me since the initial airing of Deep Space Nine. And it really resonated with me. It reflects my take on life as well. My own journey has me being several people, for lack of a better term, over what Cisco calls time. But in fact, I'm all of those people, and I always was, always have been. This concept that we're nonlinear is particularly poignant, I think, I feel more deeply now, to the LGBTQ community. Yet again, DS9 was miles, light years, whatever term you want to use, ahead of anything else. And I don't even think they realized how applicable some of these topics were. So that really, really struck me. The other thing that I picked up on just quickly was Odo's face was significantly more defined, narrower, wasn't as puffy. It looked like they changed that up as time went by. And then the trivia,
we all had that change over the last 4 years. So.
I've had it a lot. I've gotten puffier in some places I'm happy about, and not in some places. But there was one trivia question for all of you here today. See if you can get it. Ryan says that Shaq, as Sirach dubs him, the gentle big man, likes one thing in particular. And coincidentally, I love that same thing. Do you guys remember what that was?
Oh, I think I know what it is.
White Castle. Something.
No, that's East Coast.
No, it was,
but you're very,
In-N-Out
you're
burger?
sniffing it. Yeah, you're right on the,
Oh,
on the track.
no.
All right, In-N-Out.
There it is.
I know what
Double
it is.
doubles.
Double doubles.
He ordered
Double
4 double doubles.
Exactly. So that's what I've got. I loved watching it again. I loved watching it after having watched the initial review, and then watching it. I've watched the initial review 53 minutes like 4 times. It's just ridiculously wonderful. And then watching this again. So yeah, lots of good stuff to catch again and newly, especially.
Speaking of gentle giants, Galdu Scott Jensen is also here. He's like, is he going to pick me? Did you notice anything new on your 47th viewing of this episode?
Yeah, 407th millionth run. Like Mai was saying, just on a funny bit was the makeup differences. How Kira had the TNG, kind of the brow on the nose makeup. It kind of went out a little bit like Rose did, and how Quark looks really different without that eyeshadow. Like it was bracing for a second. Well, wait, whoa, because I think by the second episode it's on there. This is like the only time we see it without that. But something really cool that I did grab that I noticed a lot more distinctly this time around was probably the best cold open maybe on any TV show ever. Like
absolutely
the whole battle and the explosion and then the launching out of the side of the ship. But then there comes the scene where Ben and Jake are about to land in DS9 and they both stand at the window and look directly at it out. And I felt that it was cool. I don't know if this was intentional, but it mirrors that last scene in the last episode of Jake looking out. And how I felt like
good point.
Wow.
A lot of time. Well, I think it was Jeffrey Combs that said in the doc about how it's the journey of looking within. And I felt that when they were looking at that station in the beginning, they were looking within, and they were maybe being present at that time for the 7 years that we watched them, and then Jake finally looking out at the universe afterwards, and that it was a giant full circle in that particular. If it was meant to be or not, I think it might make it even cooler if they didn't mean to do that. But that last shot and that first shot at the end of that first scene in the first episode, it's just I wonder even if we could look at the schematics of the station and see if they were literally looking at that same window.
Oh,
two of them are looking at.
That'd be cool.
That would be cool if it was.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant stuff, Scott. Did somebody say brilliant? Dr. Susan V. Gruner is also here. How are you, Sue? She's looking at Deep Space Nine from the outside, according to her background. Did you notice a couple things this time, or felt a couple things you hadn't felt before?
I attempted to watch the first review, but I couldn't watch it. But I've seen it. I watched it today, and this is like my 47th time probably. And I noticed JG was on it just by his voice. I didn't pick up on that before. But we keep saying the same things, but that's because they're true. This was the best first episode of any television show, let alone Star Trek. The best, what do we call it, premiere or pilot? It wasn't really a pilot, but I thought Avery just knocked it out of the park, and so did you, Sorok. You're just a little kid, and you were so little. And
how little was he?
The faces that you made, looking at the room with no bed, and not wanting to eat. The replicator didn't work right, and that little back and forth between a dad and his son, unhappy son, about being in this new place that you really didn't want to be. I thought it was fabulous. The part where he touches you, I've mentioned that before, he kisses your head. That is something that a parent does to their child. This man, we absolutely believe that you were his son. It was just so great, the chemistry that you have with him. And that lasts, I think, still to today. Is that correct? That you're still really close with him? It's just amazing. This show is just so great, so detailed, so relevant today. I don't think it's ever going to age. I need to know what the secret is, but it's fabulous. Anybody that doesn't say it's a 10, well, you know how I feel about that.
Speaking of ageless secrets, Carrie Schwent, how are you today? You got a really cool background of Deep Space Nine. Looks like, is it the tapes or the DVDs?
Tapes. Old school VHS tape, very dusty tapes.
Holodeck. Wow. Holo Suite. Did you notice a couple things this time that you hadn't noticed before? Any new observations?
I did a couple things. One of them is a sort of a follow-up to something you said about Dukat, Ryan, that I found through a Facebook post recently in the Star Trek family Facebook group that I'm a part of. He's been doing a bunch of posts celebrating that at the anniversary, and one of them was Dukat specific. And apparently Dukat was not meant to be recurring.
Oh, interesting.
But he impressed the producers so much in his first scene that they decided to keep bringing him back. And they enjoyed his performance so much that they kept adding more and more layers and complexity to him. And he also, apparently, according to some of the comments, it was not the original Dukat. They had somebody else at first. And after filming one scene, I guess the producers decided that they didn't like him as much. So then they rushed in Marco Imo, got him up and running, and impressed them so much they kept him as recurring.
Wow. That just keeps happening in Deep Space Nine.
Yeah.
Who is that guy?
Yeah, and a couple of quotes that really stood out to me this time. The one I mentioned in the other segment about the quote during the baseball, but there was one that really got me thinking with Sisko and Picard, where Picard is laying out his mission that he's supposed to get Bajor, into the Federation by any means possible, short of violating the Prime Directive. But then by the end of the episode, it's occurring to me, he basically becomes a central religious figure on Bajor, kind of skirting the edges of the Prime Directive on that, I think. You could sort of argue it's in kind of the gray area.
Hmm.
I don't know.
Cardassian gray.
Got me thinking.
Mm-hmm. And you said you had a couple. Was there one more, Carrie?
There was the baseball one, but we talked about that one before. I loved, as a Crazy Cubs fan, I just love everything about anything baseball related on DS9.
Mm-hmm. Just real quick.
And the Cubs was on the bus and on the uniform. Just
just real
On a
quick, I
trip,
want to
there's-
point out what titles are on those tapes behind you. We've got Battle Lines, The Storyteller, Babel, Captive Pursuit. I see Q-less. I see Duet, In the Hands of the Prophets.
Emissaries over this way somewhere, just out of frame.
Just fun stuff to notice there.
We had a big stack of them down in the basement.
I had a whole bunch too, but I'll bet you not nearly as many as Matt Boardman. Matt, did you ever have any of the old VHS tapes or DVDs?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It was both Next Gen and Deep Space Nine, and I think I had them. They were staggered, so that it was like, because they came like every 6 to 8 weeks, and so I had them like staggered. I'd get one Next Gen, one Deep Space Nine, but thankfully the DVDs came out before I spent way too much. I got calculating exactly how much you would spend at 2 episodes per tape, and I was like,
those DVDs were $170 per season. I remember.
Yeah.
And now
you can get them for or just watch them streaming. So thank goodness for the streaming. But yeah, that was, man, I used to watch those. We used to go on long trips across the country, and I'd be walking out. My dad would be like, "Okay, you can take 2, 3, maybe 4, but you're not taking a whole collection." The best part was that my sisters would always fall asleep back in the back of the van, and I'd just be like, "All right, on to the next, on to the next."
Get it all to myself.
Exactly.
Matt, did you notice? Did you
my
notice
backdrop's
anything? We'll pull it up right now, Sue. Check this out. Anybody that's listening in, Sue is pulling up. It's the script of Emissary, signed by Andrew Robinson, Chase Masterson, Armin Shimerman, and Nana. Wow, it's amazing. Matt, did you notice?
More to come.
Did you notice anything this time around that you hadn't noticed any of the many other times on your trips?
Well, the thing that I'm almost embarrassed to say is that I don't know if it's ever mentioned what ship that Jake and Cisco come in on. And for the longest time, I always thought it was the Enterprise. But then I'm like looking at it, and I'm like, no, that doesn't look like the Enterprise at all. And then they, it's like the over the comms, that's definitely not Picard when they said, we're approaching the station. And
you're right, it wasn't mentioned.
So yeah, so now I'm like, I've been like doing this mad search to see, okay, what ship is this that they're on?
You've been sitting here.
Is it in the script? Ooh, please tell
me.
Did you find anything, Matt? Please tell us yes, otherwise it's going to drive us all crazy.
I'm sure it's out there, but look, sometimes my Google foo is not strong, so it's probably out there, and I just haven't done the right search parameters. But the other thing that kind of hit me is I've enjoyed this episode, and I love watching it, but the emotional resonance of what Cisco goes through, especially right at the towards the end, where he finally has this realization that when they make that final connection between him and the prophets, that no, it's not linear for me to exist in this area, and I don't, or this place in my mind, in my life, and I don't know if that's been heightened given what many of us have gone through over the past couple of years here, but it really hit me and really affected me more, and maybe that's Deep Space Nine is that in a way it's an emotional journey. It's a discovery of our ourselves, and as we look for these things and these characters, and I don't know, maybe at 43, like that's where I'm at in this emotional journey. It's like all of a sudden I'm like, why are you crying? Oh wait, why am I crying? So, maybe that's just that understanding. So that was a significant moment for me watching it this time through.
Huge emotional journey that most other Star Trek pilots may not have. Melissa,
the shot, the shot of Cisco leaving out an escape pod or whatever it was, that when they disconnect and they see it all like falling, I thought that was a great shot.
Oh, it's so cool.
It has Cisco's profile, and then it's got the whole, leaving everything behind as it explodes in the background. I thought that the shot was like so good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I will say, from a VFX standpoint, that's one thing that always surprises me. Is like, now that I've worked in this industry for 12 years now, and looking like that was all models, and the way that it was shot, and now it's like I have the aid of a computer to help refine that and to create things if I need to, but that was all done practically, and it looks so good.
Mm-hmm. It sure does. Melissa, were there, other than the things that we already covered in the previous segments, was there anything new that you noticed this time around that you hadn't noticed before?
Mm-hmm. I did notice the same thing that Scott noticed about Jake and his father looking out at Deep Space Nine, and how that brought it full circle to what we left behind, or what you leave behind, or yeah. But a couple of things that I noticed differently. I noticed Miles O'Brien more this time around than I had previously, and how phenomenal he is. He's so phenomenal. And when he's working on the console station, I'm like, he is a master of his domain.
Yes.
And he knows exactly what he's doing. And I'm like, gosh, he's so good at his job. I want Miles around all the time because he's so good. I also noticed how Kaiopaka touches Cisco's ear.
She caressed it, right? I noticed that. She gave it a little.
Yeah, and it kind of brought up the question for me: does Deep Space Nine have an ear fetish? Because of the Bajoran earrings, and then the Ferengi lobes, and how they're,
Umaks.
and then this is where the paw is, and I love Kaiopaka, by the way. I love her. Oh, she's amazing. But yeah, great episode, and and I saw a lot of different things this time that I missed the last time. And I'll bring up one more thing: is the scenes between Sisko and Picard are brilliant, and the way that you can see the history from TNG carrying over to and being placed to, the torches being passed to Deep Space Nine, and that's what I felt in those scenes between Picard and you could see the pain that both men have felt. From their past experiences. So,
Sirach, any final thoughts on ear fetishes and such?
Not on ear fetishes, no. But I was going to say that I thought it was funny. I noticed Dr. Bashir kind of stumbling out of the airlock and right away asking somebody out on a date. I was like, dude, you just got here. Oh, Dax, like literally, like you just arrived, bro. Like, find out where your quarters are. Like, just settle down a little bit, He's like, hey, yeah, and he's stuttering, like, it would be nice to go out. And I'm like, dude, stop. You got plenty of time. The other thing is, I thought that the Cardassian gold Jasad, I was a little bit upset that the Cardassians would fire so quickly. I thought there would be more of a protocol. They had just de-escalated everything. They just handed everything back over. And it seems to me a little bit brash to be firing at the ship you just gave back to the Bajorans and the Federation. So I thought there would be more of a political kind of negotiation there, standoff. You wouldn't just fire right away, because that would be his ass if he goes back and they don't like that he did that. So I was a little upset with that. The other thing I thought was I had a little nitpick with was the flashback scene when the orb got in touch with Dax, and she had the flashback of her own Trill being put inside of her. I didn't see why she needed to be contacted by the prophet aliens. I didn't think that she was relevant to their communication, and her having a flashback of something that she already experienced didn't necessarily contribute to the story. So I didn't see the necessity for that.
But it was our first look at Curzon, and only, by the way.
Yeah, but I like the idea of showing the flashback. I just don't see that the orb would reach out to her to make her experience that for what exact purpose. I don't know. It didn't seem part of the story.
And then real slug looks like.
Yeah,
and it could have been another demonstration of what the orb is capable of. It may have been more for the orb's benefit than Dax's benefit, but it could have been both.
Yeah, I couldn't feel where it fit in the story like that scene, except for it was cool to see her in surgery and get the Trill implant. But other than that, it they could have shown us that with a dream sequence or her own personal flashback without the orb being involved. And then the last thing I'm going to say is the Bolian that saves Jake and Cisco and basically slaps Cisco out of that. He's kind of in a fog right there and he doesn't know what to do. And thank you to the anonymous, nameless Bolian who says, "Hey, Jake," and he grabs me, hands me over, and then grabs Cisco and says, "Come on, let's get out of here. We got to escape."
Yeah.
That was a moment of Cisco actually not being on top of his game. One of the few moments we see where he's not on top of his game.
It's understandable.
For good reason. For good reason. But thank you to the nameless Bolian that, saved the Cisco. So
I was a little bummed that the Bolian didn't get a name. Like, they used him in a lot of scenes. He was also in like the prophets talking and all. I mean, like, come on, give the Bolian a name.
Yeah, or Picard could have put a little medal of some kind of medal because that's medal worthy what he did in that moment. He saved Commander Cisco in that moment. So, yeah, shout out to the Bolians, man. You know what? I knew I always liked them Bolians, man.
See,
I always knew you could. You
just
always
wait.
trust a good Bolian.
You just wait until Picard needs a barber.
I was going to say they make great barbers.
Yep. There is a Bolian barber on the Enterprise.
For the record, the script just says tactical officer. Doesn't even say Bolian.
And it didn't mention the ship, right?
They say lieutenant at one point, I think.
No. Well, it mentions the ship that they were on when it was being destroyed, Saratoga.
Yeah.
Saratoga.
I noticed they didn't have any other Next Generation actors also. Like, I didn't see Worf. You didn't see...
They don't have that kind of budget.
Counselor Troy. Yeah, they were like, no, we're not.
Picard took up the entire budget for that day.
That's what I
Can I just say how awkward it was when he says goodbye to O'Brien and he's like, "So, your favorite transporter room?"
Yeah, like transporter room 3.
Yeah,
it's a Trivial Pursuit question. Remember the game Trivial Pursuit? I remember that was one of the questions a long time ago.
They should call that game Captive Pursuit. If it's Star Trek. If that's a Star Trek episode. All right, well, we got to roll out, everybody. But thank you to Sue, Matt, Carrie, Goldie Scott Jensen, and My Live in Tokyo for joining us. Thanks to Armin Shimerman for joining us and providing a lot of great insights and great questions. Yeah. For Melissa Longo, Sirach Lofton, Aaron Eisenberg, and myself, thank you so much for joining this Deep Space Nine deep dive. We'll be doing another one, but you can't guess what episode that'll be. And we'll be, I mean, maybe you'll know, yeah. We'll see you next time on The Seventh Rule. So always remember it.